Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 254, I chat with Blue Focus CTO Juan Reyes about how his company tests the compliance of content and products. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded April 30th, 2015. Episode 254. Testing 1, 2, 3. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of AVSForum.com. This week's guest geek is Juan Reyes, the CTO of Blue Focus, a company that's a little bit behind the scenes of what all of us consumers of audio and video love so much. And he's going to talk about how we make sure that that content is as good as it possibly can be. Hey, Juan, welcome to the program.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Those who are tuned in live at live.twit.tv or logged into the chat room at irc.twit.tv can post questions for Juan as we go, and I will pass along as many as I can. So, Juan, give us the overview of what exactly your company, Blue Focus, does in the world of audio and video.
Okay. Well, Blue Focus is an advanced testing company that's been around for almost 8 years. We've been heavily involved in various home entertainment technologies. Essentially, what we do is we provide testing for content providers, display manufacturers, player manufacturers to ensure that all parts of the home entertainment ecosystem are working as intended. So from the studio perspective, we'll provide testing of their Blu-ray, DVD material, some of the digital material that goes to some of the different OTT platforms to make sure that they're of the highest quality for the video, the audio, the subtitles, making sure they meet any criteria they have to their own studio-specific specifications. We'll also conduct the testing on the different players, making sure that content is compatible with the different types of players, no compatibility issues could exist. And we also do a lot of certification testing, where for different groups we will go ahead and, based on certain specification criteria, like for example the BDA, the Blu-ray Disc Association, will go ahead and test players before they're actually released on the market to ensure they're compliant with the specification. And then over all the way to the display side, making sure that the displays are properly displaying content, providing optical performance tests on the displays to ensure that they meet the different criteria in regards to color space, luminance, linearity, color reproduction. So essentially, we're involved in a lot of different technologies, different formats for home entertainment to ensure that the quality of the entire ecosystem, the content, the playback to the device, the display, everything is working as intended by the content producers and each of the individuals involved within that delivery chain.
Man, and given that the media world today is so complex, with different delivery mechanisms by physical media, by over the top, and so on. Different standards that are emerging now, and we're going to talk about those in more detail. It's an incredibly complex world, much more so than when we were growing up, certainly. And so having this sort of testing for making sure that the quality meets a certain standard, making sure that the devices comply with these standards and so on, it seems to me to be critically important.
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, for the most part, the compatibility issues that may have existed with some of the different platforms early on aren't as prominent as they used to be. But that's definitely key. I'm sure everybody's had an instance where a certain piece of content trying to play back on a certain type of device, you're running into issues with the playback, with the experience. So our goal is to work with all the parties involved prior to the release of the content, prior to the release of the device, to ensure that everything is working together so that by the time it does reach the market, should any of those types of compatibility issues have occurred during the development, they were identified and there was enough time to get them corrected.
Mm-hmm. You have a lot of clients listed on your website, that are well known to all of us: Dolby, DTS, 20th Century Fox, HBO, Lucasfilm. As far as studios are concerned, you got product manufacturers: Sony, Epson, Samsung, Panasonic, and so on. Other studios: Warner Brothers, Sony Pictures, and so clearly you've got a lot of the players in the market funneling or channeling what they do through your testing facility. It must be pretty hopping over there.
It's pretty exciting because we get to I'll say we'll get to play with a lot of the latest and greatest technologies. On the video side, we've got a lot of UHD displays. We've got some with HDR capabilities. So that's pretty exciting. On the content side, we're working with some of the, popular tentpole titles from the various studios. On the audio side, getting to play with, a lot of the different, immersive audio from Dolby, from DTS, get to play with a lot of new receivers and equipment. So you got this great mix of, exciting content, and great technology from the audio side, on the video side. So it's a lot of fun. It's pretty gratifying too to walk into a store and say, hey, there's something that our company worked on and helped to ensure that the viewing experience that a customer would have is going to be the best possible viewing experience.
Mm-hmm. How does what you do differ from THX certification? Because we know that THX certifies receivers and now TVs, and they've even started certifying cables, HDMI cables, which we're going to have somebody on from THX probably in a month or two to talk about that. But my question to you is, how does what you do differ from the THX certification program?
Well, on our end, as I said, there's two parts. There's the, some of the qualitative testing that we do, and then there's some of the compliance testing we do. The compliance testing, there's certification around it, and that's specific to the different technology groups we're working with, like BDA, AACS, Synavia. But then you have, on the content side, we're looking at quality. We're looking at requirements from the studio to ensure that it meets their requirements, whatever their specifications may be, and that there's no qualitative issues. In regards to THX has developed their own criteria for different types of devices, and they're ensuring that these devices, these equipment, meet the criteria, the standards that they've gone ahead and set up. And we've had a very long-standing relationship with THX as well. Whereas for a lot of the Blu-ray and the DVD content that was actually getting certified by THX, that carried the THX logo, we worked very closely with them by executing the certification testing on the content for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've been working, as you say, with THX to actually implement the certification of Blu-rays and DVDs that carry the THX logo. But didn't they recently stop doing that particular type of certification, or am I misremembering that?
It has been some time since THX has actually had some of the content coming out on Blu-ray or DVD with the THX certification. That's not to say that they've been, completely removed. I'm sure we probably look to see them, in the future providing similar types of certification. It's just, recently we haven't seen any titles coming out with that sort of THX certification logo on it.
Mm-hmm. So what is the process of testing the quality, compatibility, and compliance of, let's start with content, physical discs like Blu-ray and DVD, and then also streaming content, which is becoming more and more important?
Yeah. Well, when you talk about optical media, I mean, you get the disc, you pop it in your player, you hit play, and you're like, oh, this is great. But there's a lot that goes on, behind the scenes. For every disc that you purchase, you have, X number of audio streams. There could be 4, 5, 6 different audio languages. There could be 5, 10, 12 different subtitle streams. Even on the menu side, there could be 3, 5, 8 menu languages. All of those assets have to be tested to ensure that they're appearing properly. So starting with the menus, you want to make sure that the disk is loading the appropriate menu language based on the player settings. You want to make sure that all of those menus are functioning correctly, that all of the different languages are being translated correctly. So, in the Spanish menu, you have only Spanish assets, and it's the correct type of Spanish, whether it's a Castilian Spanish or a Latin Spanish.
Wow.
And then, of course, so there's a lot to consider, with that. And when you're dealing with the Japanese content as well, making sure, those are correct. We have a lot of testers on our staff who are fluent in different languages to make sure that not only are we looking at the functionality of the discs itself, but making sure that the languages are used appropriately and everything is spelled, correctly. Then you get into, the...
Sorry,
I was
go
just
ahead.
saying is, that's the menu component. Then you have the video, the audio, and the subtitle assets. On the video side, each piece of content is watched from beginning to end, in most cases, multiple times to ensure that, there's no issues with banding, macro blocking, any type of digital hit. We're testing all of this, quite upstream before it actually gets released out into the market. This way it allows the studio, the content owner, if any issues are identified that might have been introduced at some point during the production process, they can go back and make fixes, make corrections to them to ensure that final video is working correctly. And the same thing applies to the audio. We're listening to all of the different audio streams in the appropriate environment, whether it's a 2.0 stream or a 7.1 stream or even more advanced, one of the more immersive audio streams like a Dolby Atmos or a DTS, where you could be dealing with up to 12 channels of sound and ensuring that all of the speakers are firing, as intended. Since we see things as they're being developed, we come across every now and then, some interesting stuff. We deal with the major studios. We also deal with some smaller studios. To give you an example, in one instance, we were doing a test on a piece of content, and we found that somehow the subwoofer channel was being reproduced in the left, rear surround. In another case, the two surround channels in the back were actually reversed. So when a helicopter's flying left to right from the front speakers, you hear it going right to left in the rear. So things like that, which, we look to, identify those so that they can be corrected before the product is actually released out in the market.
Mahler Music in the chat room is asking, how large would an average team be for a standard Blu-ray release? Or a Blu-ray player, for that matter?
Well, we have a team of about 40 full-time employees and about another 20 or so contractors that we use off and on. And really, the amount of time and resources required to test a disc or the content really depends on the amount of content that's there. Like I said, one disc could have 2 menu languages, 4 audio streams, 5 subtitle streams. Another disc that's maybe destined for more international release could have 10 menu languages, 15 audio streams, and 30 some subtitle streams. We've tested discs that in some cases have well over 30 different subtitle streams that all have to be, reviewed.
Yeah. Well, in one sense, it sounds like a dream job for those of us who are really into movies, to be able to sit down and watch these movies. But I suppose it gets to be just another job after a while, especially if you have to watch them several times.
It's funny you say that, because we were working on a movie a while back, and one of our testers, after we were completely done with testing this particular project, it was about a 3-month project and a fairly big 3D title. So we were testing the 3D version, we were testing the 2D version, we were testing a extended edition, regular edition, and one of our testers, when we asked them, how many times have you seen this movie over the last 3 months, and they said 75 times.
Oh my goodness. 75 times watching the same movie in 3 months.
Yeah. So, and then, you saw how, as some of our clients, Fox, Lucasfilm, we went ahead and, did the testing for like the last Blu-ray releases. And we went through quite a few rounds of testing for that. And that, there were several people who watched, the different episodes, 40, 50, 60 times each.
Oh, man. And that must be really bad on like TV show season releases.
Yes, yes, but it makes for some a nice, fun round of trivia about the content here in the office.
Well, let me ask you this. From what you said, it sounds like the studio or the content provider would send you an early version of the disc, not the final production version. And what kind of player do you use to play these discs? I mean, is it just a player you could go out and buy, or is it some special deal? What's going on there?
Typically, for something like that, we want to ensure that we're testing based upon what the consumer experience is going to be. So some of the studios will have very specific requirements on certain players that they want us to use for testing. Others might rely on us to recommend players to conduct the testing on, to ensure that we're working with players that cover the major manufacturers, those which have a big market share. But quite often, it's a mixture of using a handful of players for the core of the testing, all the functionality, all of the what we refer to as the linear reviews of all the video, audio, and subtitle content. But then we'll go above and beyond that and conduct compatibility testing, where we'll go through 20, 30, 40 players and ensure some of the core functionality is working. The disk loads properly, the feature can be accessed and it can be played, the menus are behaving, correctly, to not so much, fully test the disk end to end, but provide that additional compatibility check to ensure that, the disk can actually be accessed and the feature can be viewed and that no issues exist.
Mm-hmm. Rusty Bones in the chat room is asking, does Blue Focus do in-house calibration of their testing equipment, particularly your video displays and your audio setup, or do you use an outside firm or calibrator to do that?
We actually do our own calibration here. We have calibration equipment for both the video and the audio perspective. We want to make sure that our displays are obviously working correctly. We have, room environments for the core of the video and the audio passes that are set up from the lighting and color perspective so that they're an optimal testing environment. And then, of course, from the audio perspective, we're having all of the room so that we can support the multi-channel audio using a wide variety of receivers, so that as part of our testing, we can see if any, make sure no issues are existing across different receivers from different manufacturers as well, making sure that all of that is calibrated on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. Some people in the chat room are talking about some errors that might actually get out into the public, that might make it through all of this testing, which would seem unlikely to me. But Rusty Bones asked the question, how does it that a movie might make it out to the public on physical media and have channels reversed? Java Man is talking about such an amazing how such an error got out of the mixing studio. I guess maybe that's it. It comes out of the content out of the studio with the rear channels reversed, or the subwoofer coming out of the left front, the LFE channel coming out of the left front. It seems kind of surprising that they would make that kind of mistake.
Well, one of the things you'll find is obviously the content owners have, their very tight timelines in regards to getting things released out into the store so that they can hit their street date. And, sometimes things changed, updates are made, the configuration of what a project needs to be will get updated. And you'll find, it's not uncommon for all of a sudden at the 11th hour for things to get rushed. And, that's usually when certain things will end up happening, or at that 11th hour, a quick little change is made and you change something in one area and it affects something in another. A file name gets accidentally, switched around for a piece of content. So it's not uncommon for that to happen. But at the same time, that's why on our end, we're typically testing, content at least 2 times before it actually makes it out to the street. One is to, we're doing the full test. The second round of testing is typically, number one, make sure that all of the issues that were identified were corrected, and then do another full, end-to-end test to ensure that no new issues were introduced.
Blue Rules in the chat room, nice screen name there, asks, do you watch movies on TVs, flat panels, or projectors, or both?
We do the bulk of our testing on actual displays. We have a mixture of plasmas, LEDs that we're using here. Typically, the bulk of, like I said, the testing where we're looking very closely at the video, those we're usually using 50-inch or larger displays in some of our darkened rooms. For some of the other types of testing we do, maybe we're dealing with functionality, we'll use a smaller display at a workstation. But the core of the display testing testing we're doing of the content, when we're concentrating on the video, is with those large 50-inch or bigger displays in one of our sound rooms, our linear rooms.
Mm-hmm. And by displays, you're talking about flat panel TVs, direct view displays, as opposed to projectors on a projection screen.
Correct. And a lot of that too is, the content owners as well. Many of them, they'll have specific requirements on what types of displays and what sizes they'll want us to use. And of course, we'll make recommendations to those who will ask our opinion. But it makes sense for us to use, some of the higher end, consumer grade models, because essentially those are the types of displays that the consumers are going to use. So we want to try to emulate that experience, that environment as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. CompuVision is asking about firmware updates to Blu-ray players that perhaps your testing uncovers something about a particular new title that's coming out that ends up leading to manufacturers issuing firmware updates. I've experienced this myself, where I get a Blu-ray in and I put it in a player and it doesn't work for some reason or another. And then a little while later, I find out that Samsung and Oppo and some of these other player Mac makers have issued a firmware update to take care of that. Have you run across that problem yourself?
Yeah, part of what as mentioned, the testing that we're doing so early on in the production process before it's actually released out in the market is also to help identify if any types of compatibility issues could exist between the content and a specific device. As part of the reason why, in addition to all of the full functionality and video reviews, we're doing additional testing compatibility and making sure the disc loads and can be played. So when we do encounter an issue, letting the content owner know, the display manufacturer know, or the player manufacturer know, they can work to determine what types of changes might need to be made in the content or in the player itself. And if it is something in the player, then they can go ahead and ensure that a firmware update is provided prior to the release of that content.
Mm-hmm. Related to the question of what kind of displays do you use, what kind of players do you use? I assume, again, they're what consumers can get.
We have players from every manufacturer out there. All of the the Samsung, the Sony, the Panasonics, the Oppos, the LGs. We even have, as far back as the first Samsung 1000 player that was
I remember that player.
Yeah, it's a $1,300 piece of equipment that we actually still use today. So quite often when we have a major release, we'll be requested to test the disc on that to ensure that it can still load up on that particular player.
Wow. I remember the 1000. That was a long time ago now.
Very, very long time ago, yes.
Rusty Bones is asking, how do you have your testing rooms set up for immersive audio, for Atmos, Auro, DTSX? What speaker arrangements do you use, or do you have separate rooms with different layouts for each? Because they do specify somewhat different speaker layouts, and we're going to talk more about this, but this is a good question to talk about in terms of your testing rooms.
Yeah, so essentially our testing rooms, originally they were all configured in the standard 7.1 environment. With the addition of the immersive audio, we've gone ahead and set up rooms where we have 4 speakers up on top that can be active at any time. And the idea there is we can have them repositioned so that they're either directly overhead, slightly front, slightly rear, or more moved out into the corner so that they can be configured to a proper environment based on what the audio codec companies are suggesting for the speaker placement.
So you have actually a flexible system where you can move those overhead or height speakers where they need to be for a particular format.
Correct.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I doubt very many home theaters would have that kind of flexibility, but obviously you need it in order to do that kind of testing.
Exactly. I mean, on our end, yeah, we want to make sure that we are able to test for whatever environment somebody would have in their home, but at the same time, making sure that we can accommodate, all of the capabilities of the technology as well.
Mahler Music is asking back about the displays that you look at. Do you look at any CRT TVs anymore?
What's a CRT?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, in some ways, it's still the standard of image quality, at least in terms of black levels.
Yeah.
But nobody has them anymore, so I wouldn't expect you to use them because it wouldn't be an accurate reflection of what people will experience at home.
Yeah, I think since we're not dealing with on our end, we're dealing with the encoded content, and the manufacturers or the content owners want us to ensure that we're looking at something based upon what their customers are going to be looking at. So that's why we'll be using, the higher end consumer grade displays from different manufacturers and receivers from different manufacturers as well.
Yeah. One of the issues that I really wanted to talk to you about today is 4K or UHD, Ultra HD, which is coming down the pike very fast. I mean, we've got plenty of UHD or 4K TVs. Those are slightly different meanings to those two different terms, but they're used interchangeably, so I kind of will too for now. We've got a bunch of TVs out there now that do that. We now have some content coming from Netflix and Amazon and YouTube at least. Ultraflix is another one, which is 4K. But there are still some issues that are unresolved, that are not standardized. High dynamic range, or HDR, is the most critical one, I think, because there is Dolby Vision, of course, which we only just now, Vizio has announced the reference series TVs, which will have Dolby Vision, but they're still not out in the market yet. How are you dealing with certifying and quality testing 4K content? And what kind of displays are you using? And how are you dealing with the fact that, for example, high dynamic range, there might be one type or another? Or you're not even dealing with high dynamic range quite yet?
Well, yeah, 4K is UHD is something that's very exciting to us. We're very much looking forward to that. We've been involved with it for quite some time, especially with a lot of the different groups we're involved in, like the Blu-ray Disc Association and others, where we're working feverishly to launch the next Ultra HD Blu-ray format. But in regards to the content, I mean, right now, you have some of the basic capabilities to 4K, which essentially is just, higher resolution.
Right.
That's the one aspect of it. But what you're going to start to see down the pipe, as you had mentioned, are things like the HDR and the different flavors of HDR, being able to see like the higher frame rates, which can go up to 60p, the increased color space, where you can go from the current 709 all the way up to, BT 2020, which takes you up to 73% of what the human eye can see, whereas the current 709 only gives you, less than 40%. So it's going to be very exciting to see exactly how that all transpires. But at the same time, it's also going to complicate things, making sure that all of the different flavors of what the content capabilities could be and what the display capabilities are and how they work together. It's going to be interesting to see how that all transpires. And in regards to your comment about HDR, to really see how the market, handles that, and which flavor of HDR you might end up, seeing more of. They're all very exciting. If you haven't had a chance to see any type of HDR, demonstration, I highly urge you to take a look at that, because in my opinion, it's really one of the most, visually amazing things and most noticeable that you can see. Looking at higher resolution, you're not always going to be able to tell the difference between HD and UHD if it's just pixels alone. Adding more color, depending on the content, you definitely could. Obviously, the frame rate is noticeable, but if you have, HDR content on an HDR display, you can see the difference easily from across the room. It's great.
It's exactly what I've said all along, as well as saying, I can talk about it, and you and I can talk about it, and I can write about it till we're all blue in the face, but the rubber meets the road, so to speak, when you actually see it. And I've seen various demos. I'm sure you've seen various demos. I don't know. I mean, we're about to embark upon a new commercial cinema situation with Dolby Cinema using Dolby Vision high dynamic range projectors and content graded for high dynamic range projectors. And that's going to be, I think, the first opportunity for the public at large, at least those who live near those few theaters that are going to have it, to see HDR for themselves. And I really can't wait for that to happen. The first movie coming out is Tomorrowland from Disney, and it's going to be in Dolby Vision, at least one place I know in Hollywood here in LA, perhaps in Burbank. I'm not sure about that yet. Have you at Blue Focus been working with high dynamic range content in terms of testing it and so on in your facility, or is it not quite baked enough for that yet?
We actually have been involved a little bit with testing of HDR content on HDR displays, and kind of having more of a dialogue in regards to seeing what seems to look better in regards to when you grade something at a certain level, how does it look on this type of HDR display or that type, and just kind of going back and forth. So there's just been a lot more of a subjective review of how content can be configured differently, as opposed to testing content that's about to be released, because that's still I think a little bit ways away before we start to see that become more mainstream. But we're definitely involved in looking at what type of HDR combinations could be coming out, and just giving our feedback on them.
Do you have any HDR displays at your facility, and if so, what are they?
We do have a few. Some of them I can't really mention because we receive early models from display manufacturers to start helping them out with testing and support the studios with some of their content. So a lot of that I'm not able to say, but we do have some, and it's exciting to be able to have those here and take a look at some of the iterations of different content that's configured different ways to really see how it looks.
I suppose another aspect of what you do will be coming very soon, which is what happens when content graded for high dynamic range or wide color gamut or high frame rate hits a TV that doesn't have those capabilities. One of the problems I've foretold is that the 4K TVs that are mostly available today still are basically BT709 color space, and standard dynamic range. So what are you going to do when this high dynamic range content, wide color gamut, and so on, hits a TV that's bought today or earlier this year or last year, a 4K TV that doesn't have those capabilities?
Yeah, that is a very good, very valid point. In fact, we created a program, a UHD qualification program to help identify those situations just like that, where you have scenarios of content that supports all the greatest bells and whistles, BT 2020 or a short flavor of that like a P3, the higher frame rate, HDR. But what happens when you plug it into one of the existing displays, which eventually will be referred to as a legacy UHD display that doesn't support those capabilities, and trying to define tests around them to ensure, from a compatibility perspective, that things are working correctly. What you'll probably start seeing, like if you take a look, for example, at the Blu-ray format, where that'll be coming up, where you'll have the ability for the players to take that content and sort of down convert from HDR to SDR, and do the same thing with the colors, and having things map so that it will still appear properly, and you don't have things, colors or brightness levels getting crushed and creating, a bad viewing experience, or you might have different versions of content coming out, where for 4K you have a HDR version, or you have a SDR, standard dynamic range version, and depending on your display capabilities, you select which version you'd like to view.
Of course, that's going to give the studios fits, because probably the thing they want to avoid as much as possible is having to generate different versions. This also comes up with immersive audio. Are you gonna put on the Blu-ray disc, the Atmos soundtrack and an Oro soundtrack and a DTS:X soundtrack or whatever? I'm sure that they don't want to have to do many different versions. Although even now, I guess they do, don't they?
Well, I think it's a matter of also what they want to do and how they want to control the content. I mean, if you take a look, for example, at 3D, I'm sure you remember Blu-ray 3D, which we still do quite a bit of Blu-ray 3D testing. But many of the studios actually make a separate 3D and 2D disc, even though the Blu-ray spec allows a 3D disc to be played so that if it's connected to a 2D display, it only displays one of the eyes, one of the views.
Right.
So,
why do they do that? Why do they release separate titles, one with 3D and one with 2D? I've noticed that, and it's baffled me.
Yeah, it's often because my understanding is when you're looking at the content, there's not the left eye or the right eye that really has the creative intent of how they want it to appear, so they have a completely different edit for it, so that in this way they can control it on basically what the content owner intended. And I think you might see some of that as well for the HDR and the SDR perspective. On the audio side, the nice thing about that is that the receivers will have the ability to actually sort of downmix the content. So even if you have a 7.1 plus the additional 4 channels, but maybe you don't have those 4 channels, it can take that sound and disperse it into the rest of the surround channel. So it's not like you're going to be losing information. It's just going to come out of speakers that exist in your current configuration. And the same thing applies if you play a 7.1 mix, but your system only supports 5.1. You're still going to have all of the audio coming out of the 5 channels.
That was my next question, in fact. We were talking about what happens when an HDR content hits a non-HDR display, and the same thing with the audio. And part of what you do, I guess, is make sure that you don't lose anything that should be in the overhead channels, and they end up in the channels that you have available to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the the great things about the audio is how compatible they are to receivers and configurations, where all of the different channels that the content supports, even though they may not exist in the consumer's environment, all of the audio is still able to be output appropriately.
Blue Rules in the chat room is asking to make sure we point out that to get HDR into a TV from a Blu-ray player, probably going to have to pass through an AV receiver. And that AV receiver had better have the capability of passing that content on through, which brings up the question of product testing, which you also do at Blue Focus, right? You test Blu-ray players, AV receivers, game consoles. Somebody here in the chat room earlier, Undermined, is asking about if you use a PlayStation 3 as a Blu-ray player. And Mahler Music is asking, I see a gaming wheel in the background there. Do you guys also test PC games?
We do a lot of different types of testing here at our facility. We do mobile app testing. We do game testing. We are an Xbox certified testing center, and the PS3 we use it very widely for our Blu-ray testing as well. So we've been talking a lot here about content, but our organization is involved in a lot of other types of entertainment technologies. Testing those as well.
Mm-hmm. S-Wave Pro is asking, do you test interconnects as well? Cables?
Well, we don't specifically test cables and how they're functioning. I will say, back in the day when 3D was first coming out and people were concerned with, the capabilities of some of the cables, we got together with companies like, Monster, where we were ensuring that, with different titles, different receivers, titles with high bitrate video that were in 3D, ensuring that there were no issues with the signal being passed through. But testing specifically for cables, we're really not involved at that level. That's a different level requiring additional scopes and equipment. We're really more about the content, the players, the displays, and the receivers.
Mm-hmm. Quickston UK is asking, when are we going to see new disc formats, as Blu-rays must be getting full now with all these new technologies? Well, we do have an Ultra HD Blu-ray spec that is very close to being done. And you said you've been working with the Blu-ray Disc Association to some degree on that, which will increase the capacity of the Blu-ray disc quite substantially.
Yeah, that's correct. We've been a member of the Blu-ray Disc Association since 2008. Very involved in a lot of the technical groups that build up the BDA. I myself actually chair one of the groups, the System Compatibility Group, which is responsible for helping to ensure compatibility between the content and the players. And yeah, they are very close to having, product come out. I mean, the specification is something that they've been working on for quite some time for Ultra HD Blu-ray. And right now they're looking to, and we've seen in different announcements, that the plan is in the fourth quarter to have players as well as content available out in the market for this new format.
And you're going to be looking at those players and that content before it hits the market, aren't you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We'll be getting, players in our facility much earlier than that, so we can, start to test them before their release, working with the player manufacturers directly to help, support their development, as well as working with the BDA to conduct certification of some of these players, and testing the content that's in development from the different studios to ensure that, again, compatibility types of issues can be identified before the products are released. And then adding on top of that is working with display manufacturers as well to have some of the different displays in here to ensure that content with all of the different UHD capabilities is displaying correctly on different displays with also different types of UHD capabilities.
Do you interface at all with HDMI licensing in terms of the HDMI specification? I'm thinking in particular now about HDMI 2.0A, which updates 2.0 to be able to carry high dynamic range metadata along HDMI from one device to another. Is that something you guys get involved in?
Not so much. We've had, conversations with HDMI to discuss ways in which we might be able to help support them, especially in the development of the, UHD format, specifically around, Ultra HD Blu-ray. But primarily our focus right now has been really more on, the players, the content, and the displays themselves, as well as the receivers.
Mm-hmm. I just saw a question here earlier, and can't find it at the moment. I'll look for it while I ask you the next question, which is, what happens if a product or a technology that you're looking at doesn't perform? Do you have any policing facilities, shall we say, or can the manufacturer or whoever didn't fall into compliance say, doesn't matter, I'm going to release it anyway?
Well, the word perform, that's something that is very subjective. Perform and compliant are really what you want to look at, and the question there is, if something is compliant. Whereas our work as a test center, I'll take the BDA for example, we will test a player before it's actually released in the market to ensure it's compliant with the specification. If there's an issue with a certain function that's part of the test specification that doesn't pass, that manufacturer is notified and must then make a necessary correction to ensure that passes. So once a player is then 100% compliant, passes all tests, then the go-ahead is given to the BDA by our test center, and then that player can be released out into the market. So there's where you're talking more about the compliance with the specifications for whatever technology is being used by a given device. Mm-hmm. But performance is performance is something a little different. A player's slower than the other. That's
you're not gonna necessarily do anything about that if a player is slower or not. Right. But I suppose, I guess you're going to test TVs that they can conform to the color space they're supposed to, and so on and so forth. So if they don't, again, that's a matter of compliance, not of performance. I get your distinction, and it's a good one, and I appreciate that information. iPhone 7490 asks, how are you dealing with copyright stuff and things like keys that are supposed to change every minute or two or whatever? The whole issue of digital rights management, or DRM, is a huge one. And I wonder how Blue Focus deals with that, or if you do at all.
I mean, on our end, the testing that we do is to, part of it covers different levels of security, where when content is encrypted, we are making sure that the content can be, appropriately accessed. We're not really involved at the stage where, things are tested when keys are changed, when keys are first initiated or implemented. It's more just ensuring that the keys are working and actually allowing the proper playback of content, and not incorrectly inhibiting the ability for somebody to play it back.
Mm-hmm. Rusty Bones is asking, what brands of video and audio cables do you use in your setups? Are you willing to talk about that?
We don't really go after a specific brand. We have a variety of Monster Cable and several other different manufacturers. I haven't really been too involved in the acquisition of the different cables that we've been using here. But again, we try to use a wide variety and look at what is more prominent in the market, so that we can ensure that we're emulating what the market is using, what the consumers are using in their home environment as much as possible. Mm-hmm.
Here I found that question I was looking for. iPhone 7490 again is asking about home theater PCs, HTPCs, and software like Power DVD and so on. Do you get into that at all?
Oh, absolutely. We work closely with a lot of the manufacturers, Cyberlink, Corel, ArcSoft, in providing testing for their software players in the same way we do testing for the CE manufacturers for their Blu-ray players. So the same type of certification testing that we do before a physical Blu-ray player is released, we provide that same certification testing for the software players before they are released.
Mm-hmm. The other question that I wanted to ask you was regarding ultraviolet. We were talking about DRM a moment ago, and now we have this thing called ultraviolet, which if you buy a Blu-ray, say it might have, an ultraviolet feature on it, which basically lets you take that content, put it in a cloud locker, as they call it, and then be able to watch it on your smartphone or tablet or whatever. How are you involved with that process and that technology? I know you work with the, what's the name of the organization that administers ultraviolet? DECE. I forget what that stands for.
DECE, that's right. Yeah, Digital Entertainment Content Ecosystem.
Okay. How do you work within that?
Basically, we've been members of DECE for, gosh, I want to say about 3 years. And similar to our involvement with the BDA, we working very closely with them with several of the different technical working groups, business working groups as the format evolved. So we've been doing various types of testing. From testing of some of the web portals, testing of some of the earlier devices that were supporting some of the playback of the what they call the CFF, the common file format, and right now we're also very involved in helping to oversee the compliance program that DEC has to ensure that all of the different aspects within the ecosystem are compliant to their to the specification.
Mm-hmm. I've never used it myself, and I probably should, given what I do in my job, but I haven't. But I've heard a number of people say that and that doesn't necessarily work perfectly all the time.
Well, the ultraviolet ecosystem has evolved, significantly since it was first launched, and year after year, the number of users has been increasing. The number of rights that each user is using is also increasing. I think it's great in that it allows you to, regardless of where you might have purchased your ultraviolet content, or whether you used a code from your disk, or whether you took a disk into a store to get the digital rights to it, and having that ability to play it back on a variety of different applications without having to copy your file back and forth. You have a TV that has the Vudu or Cinema Now app, you can access your content. You have an iPhone or an Android device with something like the Flickster app, you can access your content. So you can access your content from pretty much wherever you are, whenever you want to access it. So it gives you it really opens things up. I know a lot of there's people who haven't really tried it yet, but quite often when people do, they realize, wow, this is nice. I have more access to to what's mine, rather than being limited to accessing it only in my home from my disk, or having to download it to a specific device, because it offers the ability to download or stream. So it's pretty nice.
That is the goal, and I guess it works pretty well most of the time. I really need to look into it, do it myself, just so that I have my own experience with it. GPEG in the chat room is asking, what about augmented reality? And I would add to that virtual reality. At the recent NAB show in Las Vegas, there were a number of presentations at the Technology Summit on Cinema about virtual reality and how that could become sort of the next paradigm for home theater. I have some questions about that, philosophically at least, but my question to you is, do you get into any kind of testing with things like the what's the thing called?
The Oculus.
Oculus Rift. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. We've been looking very closely and monitoring that to kind of keep an eye on how things go. It looks pretty exciting. There's a lot of capabilities, a lot of potential there. As things progress, it could delve into more of like you said, a home entertainment, hope theater type of environment. And so that's why we're kind of keeping an eye on it to see where it goes, and where it makes sense for us to, kind of get more involved with that, because there's a lot of different aspects to that technology. And then of course you also have the physiological effects that could be a result of that. When 3D was just coming out, we were involved in a lot of different groups, some of them that dealt directly with the physiological effects of 3D and how it affected different types of viewers, different ages, things of that nature. So I think a lot of that experience is going to go apply directly to that type of content.
Mm-hmm. Well, we certainly saw in 3D where some people got a little nauseous, and the difference between active shutter glasses and passive polarization glasses was another thing. It seems, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of disappointed that 3D has kind of waned. particularly with 4K. I mean, one of the things that I think that, pardon me, that extra resolution helps with is with passive glasses 3D or glasses free 3D, because you have many more pixels, and you can split them between the two eyes and have a much better experience, I think, at least in terms of resolution, than what a 1080p polarized 3D, passive 3D, or glasses free 3D TV might provide. I'm kind of sad about that.
I mean, 3D was when it first came out, it was exciting for everyone. We really, jumped on and tried to get our hands on one of the first, 3D TVs available. In fact, I think we got one of the first 3D TVs on the West Coast at the time, shipped to us from one of the retailers out on the East Coast. But I think, yeah, with 4K, definitely the resolution, could be a factor that could help more with the glasses free 3D. But as you mentioned, I mean, the market, I think, for 3D didn't really take off as much as everybody had hoped. It's not to say that it's dead. There's still a lot of 3D titles coming out theatrically, and many of those make it to 3D versions for Blu-ray. So I think you'll still see 3D out there in the industry coming out on your Blu-ray titles.
Certainly 3D titles are still coming out. And I was curious about whether or not they're also coming out on Blu-ray, and apparently they are. So it's not dead, but it's not the buzz that it used to be, huh?
Right, exactly.
Do you do any work with commercial cinema content, or is it all content that's going to end up being delivered or specifically to the home?
Primarily, the work we've been doing is what's going into the home. We've worked a little bit with some of our clients to actually do some testing of some of the DCP files before they're actually released. But the bulk of our work has been primarily the content that's geared towards going to the home.
Mm-hmm. Somebody in the chat room asked, and I can't find it at the moment, if you've ever seen content. If you've ever had content come through your facility with more than one viewing angle. This is a feature of Blu-ray that very few titles seem to exploit.
Yeah, every now and then we will come across something like that, and usually it's more in like the bonus material where you can play a piece of bonus content, and it'll show you like different levels of previs and then the final render, so you can kind of get a good feel on what things look like as it progresses. That's really where we've been seeing more of that, different viewing angle type of material, more around that. Not so much around, here's one camera angle or another angle, but using that technology to give different, views or different, levels of content being completed, which is pretty nice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was Quixton UK, by the way, who asked that question. I found that as you were talking. Let's talk just another moment about immersive audio, because this is another thing that's coming down the pike. And you talked about how you already have a system set up where you can move the overhead speakers around. Is there much content? I mean, there is some, I guess, Atmos content. There are, what, half a dozen or a dozen discs so far that have been released in it. Have you done anything with any of the other formats, Oro? DTSX has only just been announced. Maybe you're working with them and have heard some prototypes. What can you tell us about your experience with immersive audio so far?
Yeah, in regards to that, we've been conducting a lot, different types of testing with it. Some of it is on the actual content that's being released, as part of our review of the audio, running the immersive audio in those environments, and then making sure that all of the channels are firing appropriately, and that everything sounds as it should, looking for those audio related issues like a pop, a click, or a level dropping or increasing in a specific channel, as well as the compatibility testing by running that same audio through receivers that don't necessarily support that those immersive audio codecs to ensure that they can still play the content, play the audio back correctly, and don't introduce any types of issues with it.
Right. Your website also talks about product testing, and we've talked about that some during this hour. Displays, media, server, receivers, set-top boxes, stuff like that. And it also talks about performance. So I want to ask you this one more time. We talked about this, touched on this a little bit ago, but what's involved in testing the products? Just make sure they operate as the owner's manual says? Is there really no consideration for how well it performs? I realize that's a subjective evaluation, but are there no objective criteria for performance?
In regards to the performance testing, in some cases it's more of a comparative test where you're looking at model A, B, C, and D and recording values in regards to how long does step X take and step Y take, so that we can then provide results to the clients that are requesting them, and they can look at performance across different types of devices and see if they need to make any adjustments on their end, or if they need to contact any of the product manufacturers to have discussions in regards to some of the performance values that they're getting. So it's not like we're testing to any criteria that we defined for performance. It's more of a comparative test against similar types of products for certain types of performance-oriented tests.
Got it. CompuVision in the chat room says, Mike Oldfield's exposed DVD shows three unique angles of a fantastic live performance, plus a fourth showing the other three. I don't quite get that, but there's an example of a title that has more than one viewing angle. Perhaps a concert video might be a good place to put multiple angles.
Oh, I think that is a great way to do it, because in a concert they're typically jumping from angle to angle, and if you could have it to where the viewer itself could choose which angle, I think that would be great. And the Blu-ray format is one that definitely supports that. I think it supports up to 7 different angles, but there's a lot of capabilities there. It's just a matter of the cost associated with implementing that, and whether the content owners and those that are producing it want to actually, take advantage of it. The technology's there. It's just a matter of, do you want to use it?
Do you want to use it? Yeah. CompuVision also says multiple angles is a great usability question. His first DVD player let him switch angles with a single click. Newer players hide this feature in the menus. So it would be great to bring it back out on the remote. One last question here from Rusty Bones. Do products or titles that you have certified and evaluated carry a BlueFocus logo, like THX certified products carry a THX logo?
There's some products. A while back, we developed a 3D certification program in conjunction with THX. So, there's some titles like if you take a look at the 3D Avatar or Titanic, where you can actually see the BlueFocus THX 3D logo on the back of them. So that was a pretty exciting time for us.
Mm-hmm. You probably can't tell me what titles you're working on now that will be coming out soon, right?
That is correct.
Darn. Thought I might slip one in there, but I guess not. Okay, well, we've come to the end of a fabulous hour, and I want to thank you so much for being here. It's been great to sort of peek behind the curtain and see how this content and these devices that we all enjoy to use so much actually are certified that they work properly. So this is a very important job you're doing, and I want to thank you very much for doing it and for being here to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate all your questions and the questions from all the participants that are on the event. Thank you.
Yeah. The chat room here has been buzzing with questions, and I thank them also for posting all of that. You want to find out more information about Blue Focus? You can go to bluefocus.com. That's BLUFOCUS, bluefocus.com. You can find me at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv, and you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott, also at avsforum. And you can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here on twit.tv /HTG, also on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Next week, my guest geeks are scheduled to be David McKenzie and Dwayne Davis, two really top flight video calibrators who are going to come on to discuss the challenges facing calibrators as we move into the 4K Ultra HD universe. So I do hope you will join me for that. Until then, geek out. This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded April 30th, 2015. Episode 254. Testing 1, 2, 3. Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 254, I chat with Blue Focus CTO Juan Reyes about how his company tests the compliance of content and products. So stay tuned.